Hi everyone, Dr. Samantha Cottrera here for the Imagining a New We video blog, a video series designed to help history teachers and other history educators teach history in ways that are more meaningful, transformative, and inclusive for their students. Because Mondays are meaningful, I have been starting every Monday with these short reflective videos introducing some theories and inviting a point of reflection based on that theory if you are interested. For the last 2 weeks and for the next 3 weeks, or 4 weeks, like 3 weeks including this week, so 4 weeks, I am going to be bringing in elements of theory that I talk about in my new book, Transforming the Canadian History Classroom, Imagining a New We. I'm not quoting myself necessarily. What I am doing is bringing out elements of theory that I found really useful as a way to also introduce you to a chapter in the book. And this week is chapter 3, Students Speak, Their Desire for Connection, Complexity, and Care in Canadian History Education. This is my favorite chapter. Hands down, definitely my favorite chapter. It's funny though, because like I said, I'm not interested in quoting me necessarily in these videos, but like other theorists that have done this work. And I'm not actually quoting a lot of theorists in chapter 3 because I'm really just quoting the students that I worked with in my research. I worked across 4 different schools. I did focus groups, group interviews with students at all of those schools. It was so wonderful and great to get to know them. And you know, I wrote this in the acknowledgements, if you read the acknowledgements, that like I felt a duty to go back and write this book because of the promise I made to those students that I would share their experiences with the world. One student said to me, like, I'm participating in this research because it could change the way people teach history. And then she said, if anyone actually listens. And you know, like, that really haunted me for the time that I finished my research to the time I started writing the book, and frankly to the time I published it, because I recognized that I was going to be able to give people a chance to hear what these students were saying, or, you know, say like, I don't have time for that. And hey, people don't have time for things, that's fine. But I just felt like a really strong impetus to keep my promise to these students. And chapter 3 is really that promise fulfilled. I bring in quotes from students to identify that they want connection, complexity, and care in their history education. And while teachers do connection and care often very well, that notion of complexity is really important too. And that notion of complexity also ties in with what we mean by connection and what we mean when we think of care. In the Teacher's Book Club Guide that is now available, one of the questions that I ask is, how does the ideas of critical race theory that I talk about in chapter 1, you can also see the chapter 1 video to tie that in, how do those ideas connect with how we understand connection, complexity, and care? Do those 3 things mean the same thing for every student with every teacher in every classroom? Spoiler is no. But what does that mean? What does that mean when we are thinking of connection, complexity, and care? And how do things like critical race theory and critical pedagogy really help us make connection, complexity, and care poignant and important for the students that we have at that moment, at that time? I really hope that you get a chance to read chapter 3 because I think it is important. The more we listen to students, the more we can be responsive in our history education to reflect and do what they need us to do as history educators. One of the things that came up whenever we did these focus groups, these group interviews, and a couple one-on-one interviews, was how much students wanted to be seen and heard in their classes. I had one student that said, you know, I just really wish when I was like sleeping during my grade 10 history class, and for teachers in Ontario, you know, grade 10 history is the mandatory history. It could be grade 11 in Manitoba. It could be, well, it could be grade 7 in Alberta with the one course in there. Whatever that mandatory class, she's like, I just wish when I had my head down on the table and I was ignoring it, that my teacher just said like, hey, wake up. What do you think about this? What do you want to learn? And we so often will hear our students say like, oh, I don't want boring history. I hate Canadian history. I hate the textbook. Everything is boring. Well, what do you want? I want interesting history. Well, what's interesting history? Like, we hear so much this notion of boring and interesting, and it seems very one-dimensional. In this chapter, I say that it's not quite as one-dimensional as we could think about it. Really, what students are asking for when they are saying they want interesting history is history that connects with them. When they're saying that they hate the textbook, what I argue is that they hate this one-dimensional understanding of history. And all the students said, like I said, they wanted to be seen and heard more, and they really identified that the instructional approach of discussion-based classrooms really helps bring that up. So when I started this video, I said I wasn't really quoting a lot of people in this chapter. I'm really quoting the students. One of the theories that I wanted to bring up, or one of the ideas that I wanted to bring up, was Griffith's understanding of discussion in history education. And they say, and I'm quoting, "Discussion is a form of storytelling that honors the historicity of the other by allowing students to share truths that are historically situated, embedded within culture, and which do not reflect the worldview of those in power." I just want you to sit with that for a second. I'm just going to leave it up here. I just want to highlight things like storytelling, historicity, the other, shared truths, historically situated, embedded in culture, do not reflect the worldview. If you've seen my other videos on critical race theory or counter stories, you'll see a lot of those similar things. Discussion isn't just a chance for students to talk, and oftentimes other researchers have shown that when discussions reach points where teachers feel like they can't control it, they like shut it down really quickly, understandably. But what does that mean? Like, if you're responding and you're reacting, what does that mean to the culture of the classroom? And here, this quote by Griffith from 2014 is saying, like, discussion allows us to tell stories together. If you watch my chapter 2 video, you'll know that I've been critical of historical thinking, and here is just one element I want to bring up to kind of demonstrate that. And you might disagree if you've been spending a lot of time with the concepts and you've interpreted them in different ways. But in this article that I wrote in 2018, I said that historical thinking can't respond to the TRC's calls to action because they don't allow room for this relationality and this notion of truth-telling that is central to the work of reconciliation. Because the notion of truth-telling in relationship to reconciliation is not this objective truth that we find by examining the evidence with the tools that we have, but rather it is an embodied, situated, historically situated, culturally embedded, just like this quote says, version of truth that might not align with evidence that we see. And so what happens if we're only allowing a certain type of approach to understanding the past to come in? This quote on discussion allows for more of that storytelling, more of that relational truth-telling that is true in that moment, even though we might not have the archival primary sources to back it up. So if you want to bring in connection, complexity, and care into your classrooms, you can think about this notion of discussion, and you can think about some of the other quotes that I pulled from students to think about how we can make our classrooms more complex. And as part of the Teacher's Book Club Guide, one of the reflection prompts is, when have students last said to you that they hate Canadian history? When have they last said they don't want to learn boring history and they just want to learn interesting history? What might they be saying to you that because their words seem so one-dimensional, we haven't opened ourselves up to hear? And does this notion of discussion as storytelling allow for more interesting history and histories that students hate less and really have a desire for? Anyway, because Mondays are meaningful, I hope this was an interesting, reflective video. Have a wonderful week, everyone, and I will see you next week.